I am Matthew Jenkins Yarashevitz, Music Director Designate of the Canton Symphony Orchestra.
And I'm Rachel Hagemeyer, President and CEO.
This is Orchestrating Change. Our guest today is Camille Delaney-McNeill, Director of the Judith and Thomas L. Beckman YOLA Center, serving the Youth Orchestra of Los Angeles program in Inglewood, California. Prior to her arrival in Los Angeles in 2021, she was the director of programs for the Baltimore Symphony Orchestra's OrchKids, a comprehensive music education program serving students in Baltimore City Schools. She currently sits on the board of Sistema USA and was trained as a flautist before pursuing arts management, holding performance degrees from the University of Maryland and Peabody Conservatory. Camille Delaney-McNeill, welcome to Orchestrating Change.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
I'm so glad we can finally chat. I've had the pleasure of meeting you and hearing you and seeing YOLA in action and you in action out in LA. So it's so wonderful to have you here today. If you wouldn't mind, though, just kind of introducing yourselves to our audience, sharing a little bit about you and how music became a part of your life as a young person.
Sure. I like to start when I tell these stories by saying I didn't really have much of a choice. Here's why. My mom was a professional opera singer. My dad was a lover of art, even though he was in corporate America for most of his life. But he just loved music, and he would sing in choirs and opera choruses when he was in school. So I grew up in a very musical family, and so naturally, it rubbed off on me. But I will say this, for as much as I was around my mom in particular, who's I consider my artistic source of inspiration and why I even entered into this path and lifestyle of art making. She never forced anything upon me. Neither did my father. And I think, I did have the opportunity in school to participate in music classes, but it was very similar to, I think, what we're seeing now, nothing as robust as we would all want it to be. And I had the teacher in fourth grade come by with the instrument cart. And, she played through all the instruments, and she got to the flute. And I debate whether or not I say this side of the story, because you always want it to be this like magical moment of like, yes, it's calling to me. But she played the Simpsons theme song, and that was a show I wasn't allowed to watch at the time. So I was like, ooh, somehow this is intriguing. I want to play the flute. But, of course, I was enamored with the sound and, had grown up around music. And flute is very similar to voice, by the way, but that's a whole nother conversation. And I came home and said, Mom, I want to play the flute. And she's like, okay, and from that point on, just so supportive, my family, and I'm sure we'll get to this later on in our conversation, but just having that level of support and embrace of I am sparked and motivated to do something artistic, and my family supported me in that venture. I did eventually, I played in the school band. I eventually started taking private lessons. And, that kind of got me more and more confident, more and more courage. And I was actually getting good at it, and expressing myself on flute. And that launched me into deciding in high school that it was something that I would want to pursue as my lifestyle, and really truly a performance track. Not necessarily, I also want to work behind the scenes and do arts leadership. Again, that kind of evolved. We'll talk more about that later. But that was the genesis of my musical journey. And I'll say it was so important to have that support system in place, because there are a lot of times that I wanted to give up. I got frustrated, and there wasn't any expertise that, my mom or my dad could help me, right? They weren't flute players. They weren't even instrumentalists. So it was a very interesting journey, and I'm so grateful for it because it's landed me where I am today.
Where did you grow up, by the way?
Oh, yes. So I grew up, if folks know this, I grew up in a place called Prince George's County, which is in Maryland, and it's between Baltimore and Washington, D.C. So we had the benefit growing up of like going into DC and being exposed to all of that, and then going 45 minutes up the road to Baltimore City. So just very familiar with that whole area growing up, and eventually landed more in Baltimore as I left Peabody and pursued my interests.
Of course. Did you play in any youth orchestras yourself as a young person?
Ah. You know, I really, that's really interesting. And when I'm thinking back, I really just participated in my school ensembles at the time. I actually went to all girls school, small Catholic school at the time in Bladensburg, Maryland, called Elizabeth Seton, and there was a orchestra, and it's a smaller school. It's not huge, but there was an orchestra program, and so really I just participated in that. And I remember the most I got from being around any sort of larger youth orchestra was when I started auditioning for like All State and things like that, right? So that was my, again, very critical of getting that exposure, both in my school setting and going to places like that. But in terms of signing up for a legitimate, like, 26 Saturday season a year youth orchestra program as a part of it, no, I didn't. Even me having all the musical background and support that I did growing up.
So you've mentioned this a little bit. You got your bachelor's and your master's in music performance, and then you've wound up into the world of arts administration. I'm very grateful that you're here. It's so great to have you on this side of the world. But I'm a little curious of how that journey came about for you. And do you get to play anymore? And it's that fun battle of those of us. I also have a performance degree. Like that kind of little bit of a battle between the two, it seems.
Yeah, yeah. This is always an interesting question, because I feel that especially younger professionals, right, who are emerging leaders and up and coming, it's like, what is the path? Like, what path do I take to make sure I'm like in a role like you? And actually, it's sometimes not satisfying to hear, but a truer answer is it is so unique to each individual, and it's so unique to your circumstances. And for me, it was more, and it is more, when I talk to young and upcoming leaders, about really getting to know yourself, really getting to know your value set, and then really understanding what skill sets amplify those values, and where you can execute freely. Because if you understand that, your skills are immediately transferable anywhere you go, but particularly in our arts industry. And I say that because, I mentioned my dad had a background in corporate setting, and for a long time, and he was in human resources. So in addition, he had to deal with a lot of people skills, right? So again, you don't need to have grown up in that environment to know it, but the advantages I had, or the values I started to build in myself, was seeing how to interact with people, how to observe human behavior, how to address conflict, indirectly, right? Like that was something I was beginning to practice from a young age. I used to intern in an administrative office, so I was building skill sets administratively, on that side of it, in addition to pursuing my performance degree, right, and practicing 12 hours a day when those times and came. And so I want to say that going into grad school and leaving grad school, I had a very specific vision for myself. And that was, okay, I've been trained in this art form. I've had a very traditional pathway. I played in orchestras and symphonies in school, meaning undergrad and graduate school. Okay, so I'll do the orchestra audition track, and I'll try to like play in an orchestra like that. That's logical, right? Next step. And then, I'll I'll form my own chamber music ensemble. That's really cool. I'll do that, and I think at that time, like Amani Winds was really like up and coming and solidifying itself. So there was some inspiration for like, oh, there's another branch, to go while I do this circuit. And upon leaving Peabody, I wanted to I had a little bit of experience with education as well, subbing in schools, leading some music classes, and that mostly was just to gain experience at the time, to make sure I had some sort of income. It wasn't necessarily like I'm passionate about education in that moment, right? But of course, I became that way, and I left Peabody. And I said, I want to get back into working while I'm doing these things too, maybe find something part-time. And I came across OrchKids with the Baltimore Symphony. And it was only at that time, gosh, when I joined, it was only going on 4 years old. And it's interesting that I've had the privilege and opportunity to work with two of the oldest, if you would say, Sistema inspired programs in this country, being OrCids and YOLA, right, in terms of when they actually launched and started. So it's fascinating to see how both programs are evolving and growing. But I came across OrCids, and there was just a small program assistant role that was open. And for me, I not only just finished grad school, I had gotten married during grad school. And at the end of grad school, I was expecting my first child. So there was a lot of just like, but as you probably can tell, I just couldn't stay put and not be busy and take care of a newborn. I also had to be working. So that's something else we'll talk about on a different episode. But I did want to kind of make sure I stayed connected in the field, and I sat down and I spoke to the team at the time about the program, and something in me just clicked. They were, building the infrastructure for this program, but the mission of the program to provide access to the highest intensity, forward focused education that could be provided, and bringing in like the best teachers that you could find and people who cared about social justice and equity, that music was doing so much more than just teaching a young person how to play Twinkle Twinkle on the page, right? It was so much further beyond that. And I have to say both, like, in my training, even in my experience on this earth as a Black woman and as an artist, my education did not match some of the things that I now hold so important in terms of equity within arts and music, right? Even in the canon that I was taught, I didn't learn about folks like Florence Price and these in terms of the orchestral setting. I knew a lot because of my mom and the vocal world, right? There's a lot more acceptance and diversity of composers there. But just even in my symphonic practice and growing up, that just wasn't part of the canon. And so I began to start asking questions of, wait a minute, there's so much excellence, there's so much storytelling, there's so much history that we don't have access to, and people are wondering why these orchestras are slowly dying, or whatever the case may be. Our audiences aren't broad or diverse enough, and it's just because it's not been inclusive, and also because the full story has not been told of where this music has come from, how it's evolved, and who contributed to it. So here was a program that not only was trying to address that in some way, but also was trying to uplift and create pathways for young people, particularly young people of color, particularly young people that look like me, from an early age. And we're talking about, like, if folks who are listening, watching us, remember the protests in West Baltimore when Freddie Gray was murdered, that literally happened 2-3 blocks away from the school that I would work out of every day. And so these beautiful, and when you walked into, it's this elementary school in West Baltimore called Lockerman Bundy Elementary School. When you walked into it outside, boarded up houses and I have this thing about why there were never trash cans on the street, so there were just like trash everywhere, and it's just like that kind of lack of uh care and infrastructure from a structural level, not because of the community members, but because of infrastructure and investment. And you walk into this building and it was beautiful murals on the wall, bright colors, and then you hear music. And then I was hearing things at like 8 and 9 years old. I couldn't do what they were doing on their tubas, on their flutes, on their violins. Like it was just um a pivotal moment for me to say I can actually do so much more with my art. And what they need to implement this program are structures, systems, spreadsheets, people skills, designing programs, so that was the moment for me. And so basically from 2012, I started in a very small capacity, because again, I was just kind of helping out in my mind of like, I'll do this part-time job for a few hours a week. But it turned into a passion of everything that I've learned for myself and being the musician that I walked out of that conservatory being. I can apply those same principles to how I craft my work in arts, in leadership, in arts administration, and in teaching. So that really was it for me.
Amazing. So tell us then a little bit about the structure of the OrchKids program. What age do the kids start? How often do they get instruction? How many years? What does the program look like?
Well, when I was there, and everything evolves, but we had several sites at the time. We were serving in school and after school programming, and anywhere from grade 6-year-olds all the way through 18, following them in their later high school years. And when we talk about intensity, especially in more of the category of Sistema inspired programs, and specifically saying inspired by, it's not a duplicate of necessarily what was happening, but you're talking about spending time in rehearsals, in orchestra, in lessons, whatever the case may be, like 12 to 15, sometimes 18 hours per week, right? In addition to what you're doing in your academic school year and things like that. When I left, we were up to serving close to 2,000 students between our in-school and after-school programs before coming out to LA. And at that time, we had about, I think, around 9 sites that we were operating in. But it was such a impactful, purpose-driven place and environment that we were all trying to create. And it wasn't just, again, like I said, kind of learning this rote, okay, here's the formula, let's go. But, introducing things like compositional elements and orchestrating as a group orchestra, and exploring new ways of notation and having youth stand up and lead, just not necessarily super radical concepts, but concepts that make sense that we should be doing, but we're not a lot in our music education spaces. And so, I think, and the other critical thing is the access piece, because even in both programs, right, in OrchKids and YOLA, everything is free. Everything is free because the fundamental underlying philosophy is that what we're doing here is a human right.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a luxury that's afforded to whoever has the luck of birth, right, and to a particular family or resource in community, right? So that's a little bit about the structure of OrchKids, and very similarly with YOLA. I will say with YOLA, being almost like a sister brother program type thing, very similar structure. But what we also have here is our work with the national reach. And that is creating space for music educators to convene, discuss new ideas, things of that nature. We have a huge festival that we put on where it's free to all participants. They get to work with Maestro Gustavo Dudamel, and perform at Walt Disney Concert Hall. They're playing things like Shostakovich, just it's a very intensive way to kind of bring in not only our own community, but young people from all over. And I remember actually sending some of our OrchKids students to YOLA. So it's like a full circle for me to the national programs. And actually, one of them, phenomenal young man, tuba player Keith Fleming, actually is starting his own program very soon. And he came out to LA to speak as a part of a panel of a young person who grew up. Like, I've known him since he was 10 years old. And to see him come back as an adult and speak about why this program is so important for him, meaning in Baltimore. I literally had shed a little tear in my introduction speech. I wasn't expecting that, but that's if I could sum up why this work is worth it in one visual, that was it. Mm-hmm. And I think just being able to experience that so many years later was so poignant.
Yeah, we got to talk to Lenny Borstein last season, and yeah. I love her. She's amazing.
She is. Everyone loves Lenny.
I love Lenny. And it was really cool listening to her talk about this idea of community education and music as a right. And we talked a lot of her shift of the language that we use in these situations of really changing from outreach to engagement and, these types of concepts that she really holds dear. But I would, going from OrchKids to YOLA, I'm wondering what inspire, obviously YOLA is an inspiring program. You literally went across the country, you went coast to coast. I wonder if you could give us a little, what inspired that move to go to YOLA and what do you see in its history and in its founding that kind of inspires you as you've been director of the program?
Absolutely. Like I said, I've always been aware of YOLA, right? Literally, I think the programs that I've been in, they started a year apart from each other. And I had actually come out to YOLA prior, right, to being here, and would come to the symposium, now named YOLA Accelerator in revisioned way. We'd send our students to the festival, as I mentioned. And I think the ability to be this hub for the concept of social innovation, and innovation within youth development and creative making space with young people, that transcended, it focused on the ensemble and orchestra, but kind of transcended beyond that in all these concentric circles and rings and intersection points. And so when I learned about the role and mind you, I had a conversation with the team. I wasn't necessarily seeking out to move to the West Coast. Actually, I had heard rumblings about a purpose-built building being built. I mean, that's the dream of every community music program. Everywhere, but particularly across the country. Can we just have our own space? So, I'm just in my mind, I'm that's really cool, but I talked to the team and, just got acquainted with folks. And when I learned about what this place was intended to be, meaning in Inglewood and the Beckman YOLA Center, there were a couple things for me. Number one, I looked at the organization of the LA Phil and the birthplace of this building as some of the most concrete example modeling behavior of what real investment looks like in putting your money where your mouth is, right? When we talk about transformational access, when we talk about interrupting cycles of wrongness in our society and in terms of investment and right-sizing marginalization of communities that have been, historically under-resourced and things of that nature. This is it. You've committed financial resources, human capital, relationship capital, all of that to something that is just a place for young people There's no like secret mastermind agenda. And now we're going to have, a revenue stream in 10 years of a fourth venue. No, it's for this program. And it was in response to not only leadership at the time, but also hearing from the alum of the program and the feedback that they gave of like, we love the program, we love YOLA. We wish we had a space of our own because, with every program, right? If you're doing partnerships, things like that, you're in a school, there are limitations. You have to work around schedules, or you're having your concerts in gyms, or whatever it is. We all have dealt with it, but this was to be different. So that was like bell number one, ding ding ding. Okay, this is different. This is different. And bell number two was the ability to not only have impact in your immediate community, but to have impact on a larger scale and provide resources for programs that are equally as wonderful and doing great work, but they may not have the infrastructure or the bandwidth or the financial resources, whatever it may be, to do that professional development, to get that peer-to-peer conversation going, to observe practices that work really well for designing youth programs. So I immediately was inspired by the impact potential of the space, of the role of the center, and also of what's happening locally in LA. We're serving close to 1,700 students. It's a slow, it's not necessarily like quantity is not better than quality, which is also very important and something that this organization really is comfortable with, right? And you just don't see that a lot. And so me coming from Baltimore and growing up and going across the country, seeing other programs, I felt a responsibility to say, hey, I can represent an outside perspective, and we could really make this mean something for a lot of programs across the country.
Tell us a little bit about how the Beckman Center came to be. I know you arrived when it was basically ready to be up and running, but how did it come to be? YOLA didn't always have this purpose-built space until very recently. So how did it all happen that it now has this beautiful space?
It's a wonderful thing that it did. Like you said, I came on board once things were ready to be opened. Even with I think actually COVID delayed the opening by a year, as it did for many things, right? But I'll go back in time a little bit. Out of the centennial planning for the LA Phil and working with the leadership of the board, of staff, key stakeholders, there were a couple of strategic initiatives of what should be our areas of investment for the future, where this organization is going, and like front and center, which is again another reason of like, okay, this is a place where you want to help make impact. At the center of that was YOLA, and how we're investing in YOLA, and that began a series of community talkback sessions, speaking with alum, looking and finding areas where the most impact could be felt, right? Because you're talking about a building. You're not talking about, a program that you're gonna, open up shop and then close and then whatever. And this was like a partnership, a marriage almost, if you will, of finding the right space and building roots here. So what was also part of the conversation at the time in putting this strategy in place and building investment in YOLA for the future, was anywhere that we go, it needs to be part of that community and be a resource for that community and be informed by the community that it ends up being in, right? So out of that kind of duality of purpose, Inglewood was found, and I have to say the city here has been so supportive and so excited that not only the LA Phil, but particularly YOLA is here to be an inviting space for young people from across different areas of Los Angeles County, and also Inglewood. Inglewood is its own city, right? But also that the community can participate as well, in programming, that whatever programming we cooked up here or what have you opened up to the community. So that was the start of it. And I think the key thing that I would love for people to maybe hold on to about how this got started is listening intentionally to youth voice, and to the community members that were experiencing and interacting with this resource, right? Of you can always have people and leaders, close themselves off in a room and think, oh yeah, this is what's going to be best for what we do for the next 5 to 10 years. And that wasn't the approach for this. And I think that's important to note, because that is different, especially for a larger institution like this, to just really try to be well informed from community was a really the launch point for this project.
Yeah. So this were you talking about, rooted in a community, and when you decide to build a building, you're really saying this is not going to be something we're not popping up shop, right?
Right.
That's a problem that I think a lot of the industry faces is, an organization will apply for a grant and they'll get the money and then they'll do the program and then they don't get the grant again. So it's gone. Right. And so creating like financial structures to make sure that this stuff can happen and making it a part of the budget is something that's so key, but also, talking with our grant partners and all that about the importance of longevity and consistency with students, especially with students when they're learning, is so important. And so, we have a small strings training program here in Canton. We partner with an after school program, and, we have 14 students and we do free lessons and free instruments on Saturdays. And, it's a small thing, but we are it's intentionally small because we know that we can keep that up. That's something that it's not going to just go away overnight. That consistency is important. And it's been such a blessing to have that.
We do have a youth orchestra program as well, which has 3 different levels of beginner, intermediate, and advanced. And the highest 2 are full orchestras, but those are tuition-based programs.
Exactly.
The kids that get into the advanced orchestra are kids whose parents are paying for them to take private lessons. Yeah. It's a different... We try to, through our various programs, serve all facets of our community.
And we're hoping that we're going to start seeing students entering into the youth orchestra program from our strings training program. And we are, starting to see that we're going to have some kids auditioning this year. And we kind of have this policy with the youth symphony program that if a reason the student couldn't do it is money, that's not a good enough reason to not be able to do the program. Right. And so providing scholarships for that. But I was hoping, with YOLA, which also, there's also like an administrative fellows program, and there's so many other facets of things that are going on. And you've had students that have become administrative fellows, and you were talking about the through line with Keith and everyone starting these programs. Why is it so important to have something like this, music in a community like this, to create healthy communities? We're talking about like music as a right. When we're talking to elected officials or business partners, why is music really helping us develop healthier communities?
It's such a poignant connection to be made. I had the privilege of having a time of mentorship with actually the current chair of the NEA, Dr. Maria Jackson. And, her background in community arts and urban planning, right? So it's how the arts doing exactly what you're talking about, Rachel, how the arts are contributing to healthy communities and environments. Fast forward to her role now, and the reason I'm bringing her up, there is a huge focus at so many different levels and so many different institutions, but particularly the federal level, right, in our national landscape of arts, and the state of the arts is the impact on mental health and the health community and music and art. There are now technologies being made. Like I went to a one-day summit, which was really phenomenal. And a lot of it was just describing some innovators who were working in the medical field also, but had arts backgrounds and were applying their practice to some rehabilitative measures that they were implementing in their professional space, meaning they were helping rehab patients learn to walk, but they were using music. Like there was this one clip that a gentleman showed of him. He played guitar, and so he would use the guitar and he was playing it at specific tempos. And so he had this patient who had this, essentially rendered unable to walk, and we're trying to motivate him and playing songs that he recognized and liked, but at different tempi, and then begin to increase the tempi and the rate of speed of recovery for this patient versus the traditional rehabilitative measures was just like astronomical and so clear. So, I think about the way that then we're starting to get into more like philosophical, the way that like human beings are wired, right? The way neural pathways are created in our brains. When we are around music, when we are in creative states of flow, those processes happen more efficiently and faster. So now we're not even talking about, music being like, oh, I just feel so relaxed and motivated and happy. We're actually talking about the science of what happens when the body responds, not only to music, to art, but particularly in music, since we're on that topic, what that does. And then the next step is if you actually engage in making the music, whether through your body instrument, meaning your voice, or through an external tool that you use, right? I may be controversial in saying this, but like every instrument is just a tool in my mind, a tool for inner expression, right? And so whether that tool or that voice that you choose is flute, violin, whatever, it does not produce on its own. You have to make the music on it. And I just think it's a timbre of voice. It's like, the different categories, being a mezzo or a tenor or a baritone. That's your violin, your viola, your trombone, whatever it is. So when you're creating that, your brain, your body is just working differently. And we know that it works in a positive way. We've looked at studies, right? We've now at this point have done all sorts of studies on the educational impacts of music and teaching music and having access to art during the school day and things like that. So the evidence is there. I think we need to hold people accountable, meaning leaders and officials. We're beyond the time where we need to prove that this matters. Where we're in the time of is putting in concrete systems and infrastructures to ensure that everyone is getting the same level of intensity and equitable access to these things that will literally transform them and help them be the best versions of themselves simply because of the science of it, right?
Yeah. Oh, that's so well put. I mean, it's transformational to communities, and it's not a food pantry. It's not, it's not open heart. It's not, people say we're not saving lives, right? But at the same time, I think we are a little bit, and I think that, music can be transformational to a community if actually done intentionally and with thought and with the community in mind, for sure.
Yeah. I mean, look, we are now also at a point where music is being prescribed by doctors, in certain states and what have you as medicine. So if we can take a pill to relieve a headache, then consider music your pill, and something that inevitably supports healthier systems. So it's actually vital and critical to have access to.
You've mentioned several times the intensity of the program. And you described a little bit about the OrchKids program in Baltimore, just how much time a week the kids are devoting to it. Our youth orchestra program here does not even come close to that, nor does our strings training program. And part of that is, the kids, at least in this area, are so busy with so many things that we wouldn't be able to ask them to give that kind of time. So I'm wondering, how do the kids respond to having so much intensity and devoting so much of their lives to this program?
To maybe simply put it, I'll specifically look at this in the context of the communities that we're focusing on, right? Historically marginalized communities. And when the environment around you has been, to use this terminology, has been so oppressive and so, finite and limiting, I remember talking about this with a colleague many, many years ago. It's you have to have like the counter pendulum effect to break through that, right? And to see possibility. And so that's one focal point of, just the offering of being able to be in a space where you can focus on yourself, focus on building community with your peers. You're in a safe place. You're getting access to everything you need, and you're exercising your brain in new ways 5 days out of the week, or sometimes 6 days out of the week, right? The return on investment, or the ROI on that, I guess, for a young person, right? Especially with what I observe here, is you see the progress, you feel the community, you feel the possibility. And that's what I see a lot in our young people. Like, people underestimate the resilience and the brilliance of young people. And we actually, as adults, put our own traumas and limitations on them, right? And what they can and cannot do more often than we should. There are times when our experience as older humans on this planet is very helpful, right? But we do it a little bit too much, and then we limit the possibility of the blossoming that can happen. So, I had this conversation because when we came out to YOLA, I was helping to launch also the Inglewood program that we started here 3 years ago too. And, I talked about like, hey, so I think you should really start with 4 to 5 days per week. And some of the team looked at me like, that's a lot. Like, I think people want to go to the beach. Like, they don't want to come. Guess what happened? Everybody came 5 days a week. It was a very small, but because of what they were experiencing. And so I think we have to really just pause and think and let people experience the thing, right? Before we determine whether or not something will work or not. We have to continue to innovate and experiment. If we don't experiment, we don't know. And then we've already shut the door before we've opened it, right? So, we have found that because of the community aspect of what's going on here, the bonding, the learning, the safe space, that's what keeps people wanting to return on a consistent basis, right? The music then becomes secondary to that, but it's a huge enhancement once they do get in that ensemble and orchestra.
Yeah. We've only got 2 questions left for you as we're running out of time here. I know you've got so much going on, but with, the resiliency of the youth and programs like this and intentionality and community building, why, how do we think, or how do you think that this, if our industry continues actually focusing on equitable programs and keeps it going and doesn't just let this be a phase and lets this DEI work that a lot of people have started doing continue, how do you think programs like El Sistema, programs like YOLA and OrchKids are going to be impacting the future of the orchestras that we're actually seeing in America?
Yes. Well, I'll start with this. Everyone will have to be open to the fact that it will look different and it will change. And I don't know that a lot of people are ready for that. What we're seeing on stages right now as the traditional model of presentation of orchestras, that might look very different as we're continuing to create this equitable access, this diversity of thought, diversity of values, right? I think that's been something, and this is me. Like I love playing in an orchestra. I love, playing Rachmaninoff and Beethoven and, now everyone else that I've been exposed to. But I also know that that's not the only ensemble and art form that matters, right? So then what will that look like in years to come? We don't know. But what I will say is what you're going to see with programs like this is you're going to start to see the young people who have been in them come and hopefully take the place, like hopefully in a few years. I'm not in this role. Why? Because one of our brilliant alum has taken on this mantle and is leading the charge and is well groomed for it. And they come from the community, they experience the program they can speak on behalf of, right? So that's number one. And number two, I think it will force the conversation with orchestras, with music institutions of what does our new normal look like on stages, which is inclusive of everything, right? It doesn't push orchestras to the side, but it builds and it evolves. And what does that evolve into? And being open to that is going to be very critical, because with that, there will be bounds of success. It will be successful. There won't be the panels that we have and the conferences that we have about how to build more audience strategy. We probably won't be having that as much, you know what I mean? Because people feel like they belong, that they're included, that their viewpoint and their cultural identity is found in this convening space. We're convening people as arts institutions. We're convening people as, youth providing institutions. When you convene people, you have to make space for everything that they bring with them. And we don't do that right now. We showcase a culture and say, come and appreciate. So it's almost like walking into a museum. But I think what we want is we want a living museum, right? Where we interact, like almost a children's museum where we're interacting and playing and it's changing. And I think there's a place and time for everything. There's, again, not a dismissal of the traditional orchestra setup, but it is one of many. And what do we all evolve to in the end?
Yeah.
Definitely.
My viewpoint.
Yeah. So we will finish by asking you the question we ask all of our podcast guests, and it's very open-ended. So take it as you will. How do we orchestrate change?
Okay, I'll try to be super succinct because I tend to be long-winded. We orchestrate change with open minds. I think this is a important behavioral trait that we need to practice as a larger community. And we'll see the manifestation of the change that we want, that we desire, right? If we hold on to that open mindset and the question of how might we and what if. And I think with those two governing ideas and questions, we will get to solutions that we desire and that, we build together. And we'll see the change that we're trying to orchestrate at this time, right? But people have to be willing to use different formulas, to experiment, to be open-minded. And that's how we're going to get to the change we want to see.
Well, Camille, thank you so much for chatting with us today. This has been absolutely wonderful. I always point to YOLA as an example of what good community building and education looks like.
They're doing great work here. Yeah.
Thank you so much for your whole team, all the amazing work that you guys are doing. We really appreciate it.
Thank you both. It was great talking today.
Camille Delaney-McNeill, the director of the Beckman YOLA Center, serving the Youth Orchestra of Los Angeles in Inglewood, California.
Orchestrating Change is a production of the Canton Symphony Orchestra.
Our theme music was composed by Eric Gould and performed by Derek Snyder and Tim Adams.
Our audio engineer and mixer is Nathan Maslick, with video and audio editing by Shoreline Media.
Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.